In your presentation, you talked about the realization that China has not become more like people in the or like systems in the West, and you believe this should not be a problem. Could you elaborate?
Well, we have some common values, commitments to, and I think they're universal, like people have a right not to be tortured, not to be enslaved, innocent people shouldn't be murdered, genocide is bad, and also people have a right not to be poor, that people have a right to basic material needs. I mean, I think those are universal values, and I think they're shared in principle, both in the West and in China and in much of the rest of the world. I mean, frankly, only crazy terrorists would openly defy those norms. But when it comes to what's the right way of selecting political leaders, or what's the right way to organize an economy, then we should allow for morally legitimate variation. I mean, why, for example, should we think that the only legitimate way to select political leaders, regardless of the size of the political community, regardless of the culture, regardless of the economic system, regardless of the national conditions, is one person, one vote? I mean, that just seems like an extremely dogmatic view. But I think it's one that's widely held in the West, not just among the media, but among ordinary citizens, among intellectuals, as well as among political leaders. And it's a relatively new consensus. It wasn't the case before World War II.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And of course, it all depends on the kind of culture you are doing this in, right? And those culture would also be very deep-rooted. You talk about it's ridiculous to lump China together with other so-called non-Western democracies, such as the DPRK, such as Saudi Arabia, such as Egypt. And you say it is ridiculous to do that. Why did you say that?
Well, again, it's a kind of a dogmatic view, I think, frankly, in the West. And again, it's only post-World War II that there's two kinds of legitimate political systems. One is where leaders are selected by means of elections, and the others are all the other ones, and they're bad, and the label is authoritarian, and we don't distinguish too neatly between them. But clearly, to lump up those countries together as though they belong to the same kind of family or the same political animal is just not just losing a lot of nuance, but it really fails to understand what's distinctive about the Chinese political system.
This is very interesting. Then people would say, why not the Western style, one person, one vote, even universal suffrage, where you have a direct election of the leaders? Why does China not think this would fit its political realities?
Well, the task, I think, is to hold on to the advantages of political meritocracy while having more democratic participation. And what are the advantages of political meritocracy is that all the leaders are guaranteed, as you said yourself, to have extensive experience and diverse experience at lower levels of government. If we had democratic elections at the top, somebody with no experience can be elected. Another advantage, all the leaders can take a long-term outlook. I mean, I see this as dean, you know, we plan for like 2035, even 2050, because we assume that more or less the same political system will be in place. But if we thought everything might change in 4 years, then we wouldn't be able to engage in this 20, 30-year planning, which matters on issues like climate change, right? I mean, frankly, I think we're more likely to expect China to stick to its goals than other countries where it might be a new form of government in 4 or 5 years. And as well as mentioned, I mean, political meritocracy, the leaders can spend time focusing on policy. They don't have to spend time giving the same speech over and over again and raising money. So we want to hold on to political meritocracy, but democratic elections at the top would undermine those advantages.
That's really tricky, right? I don't think everybody who grew up in the Western educational system will be able to understand that kind of nuance. But anyway, how do you look at the way how the Chinese people identify, or how much they identify with this system? Because it seems there is this understand or imagination that the Chinese people would prefer one person, one vote, whereas the Communist Party of China would impose or keep imposing this political system upon them.
Well, according to surveys carried out not just in China but outside of China, there's very strong support for the government. Now, of course, in the West, they're going to say, oh, those surveys are biased or people are not expressing their true views. But there's ways of designing surveys. You know, you add categories like don't know, where people can express their critical views. And even by tailoring surveys in those ways, the result is still consistent. That said, I mean, maybe there's a need for even more open manifestations of showing support.